At 4:47 a.m., a man in a torn jacket approached a Navy hospital with a warning that could save a life. Within seconds, a lieutenant ordered him thrown out, dismissing him as a disturbance. Minutes later, an admiral was rushed in, dying from a condition standard protocols could not fix. As doctors scrambled and oxygen levels plummeted, that same homeless man broke free from security and forced his way into the operating room. What happened next left everyone speechless. The technique he used was so rare, so precise, that only a handful of people in the entire military knew it existed. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories about hidden heroes and justice finally served, consider subscribing, because what this man did next would reveal a truth the Navy had buried for 6 years. Pre-dawn fog rolled thick over the Naval Medical Center San Diego, clinging to the chain-link perimeter like something reluctant to let go. The parking lot lights cast yellow halos through the mist, and the only sound was the hum of generators keeping the emergency wing alive. It was the kind of quiet that felt temporary, like the world was holding its breath before something broke. Ridge Calloway emerged from the fog at 4:47 a.m. He moved with purpose despite the torn military surplus jacket hanging loose on his frame, despite the duffel bag that looked like it had survived a war, despite the beard that hadn't seen a razor in months. His boots made no sound on the wet pavement. He walked like a man who knew exactly where he needed to be, even if nobody wanted him there. The automatic doors of the emergency wing entrance should have sensed his approach. They did not. Ridge stopped a foot from the glass, waiting for the mechanism to register his presence. Nothing. The sensors were either malfunctioning or set to ignore what they could not categorize. He stepped closer, triggering the motion detector manually. Still nothing. The doors remained sealed. Inside, the night shift was winding down with the controlled chaos of people who had learned to function on adrenaline and coffee. Nurses moved between bays checking vitals. Orderlies restocked supply carts, and somewhere in the back, a cardiac monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Near the main desk, Lieutenant Breslin Tate stood with a clipboard pressed against her chest like armor. She was 28, precise in every movement, and this was her first command-level responsibility. A VIP convoy was inbound. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to be controlled. Corpsman Euler was restocking a crash cart when he glanced up and saw the figure outside. He paused, gauze pack still in hand, staring at the man beyond the glass. There was something about the way the stranger stood there, patient but insistent, that made Euler hesitate. He did not move to unlock the door. He did not look away either. Breslin noticed the corpsman's distraction immediately. She followed his gaze to the entrance, and her expression shifted from concentration to concern in the span of a heartbeat. She walked over, heels clicking against the tile, and stopped at the glass. The man outside looked directly at her. His eyes were clear despite the weathered face, despite the circumstances that had brought him here in the dark. Breslin's jaw tightened. She turned to Euler without taking her eyes off the stranger. Call base security. Now. Ridge knocked on the glass. Not frantic, not desperate. 3 measured strikes that said he understood protocol but needed someone to listen anyway. Breslin crossed her arms. Ridge knocked again, harder this time, and his mouth moved. The words were muffled by the barrier between them, but his intensity was unmistakable. 2 MPs arrived within 90 seconds. Lanker was broad-shouldered and efficient, Dubose leaner, but just as ready. Breslin gestured toward the door and gave them a look that communicated everything without words. They nodded. The locks disengaged with a metallic click. The doors slid open, and Ridge stepped inside. He kept his hands visible, palms forward, body language non-threatening. His eyes swept the emergency bay in a single practiced glance, cataloging equipment, personnel, exit routes. It was the kind of assessment that happened in less than a second, but revealed years of training. Lieutenant, listen to me. The Admiral. Breslin cut him off before he could finish. Sir, you need to leave. This is a restricted facility. Ridge tried again, his voice steady but urgent. I know what's coming. I know what's wrong with him. Breslin stepped closer, her tone dropping to something colder. You don't know anything. You need to leave now, or you'll be removed by force. Ridge looked past her, over her shoulder toward the trauma bay being prepped for the incoming patient. He saw the standard intubation equipment laid out on sterile trays. He saw the ventilator standing ready. the monitor screens glowing blue in standby mode, the crash cart positioned precisely where protocol dictated. His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something that might have been recognition or concern. "That's not going to work." The words came out quiet, almost to himself, but Breslin heard them. Her posture stiffened. "What did you say?" Ridge refocused on her. "The equipment, it won't be enough." He stopped himself, seeming to realize how he sounded. "Please, just let me talk to whoever's running the trauma response." Breslin's concern transformed into alarm. This man knew about the convoy. He knew about the incoming patient. He knew details that should have been classified. Her hand moved toward the radio on her belt. "Lanker. Get him out of here." The MPs moved in smoothly, each taking one of Ridge's arms. He did not resist. He did not struggle or shout, but his eyes stayed locked on Breslin with an intensity that made her want to look away. She did not. When the airway collapses, you're going to lose him. And everyone in that room is going to know they could have prevented it. The MPs began walking Ridge backward toward the entrance. His boots scraped slightly on the tile, but he made no effort to fight them. Breslin watched him go, watched the way he moved with them instead of against them, watched the calm resignation on his face. Then she turned away, shaking off the encounter like water off a coat. The emergency bay radio crackled to life. "Inbound ETA 3 minutes. Patient is Admiral Griffin Lowe, age 63, presenting with acute respiratory distress, suspected angioedema, vitals unstable, requesting immediate trauma response." Breslin froze. Her hand was still near her radio. The words Ridge had spoken echoed in her head unbidden. "When the airway collapses." She forced the thought away and began moving toward the trauma bay, calling out prep instructions to the nurses. Outside, beyond the glass doors that had locked behind him, Ridge Calloway stood between the two MPs in the parking lot. Lanker had a hand on his shoulder. Dubose stood ready in case he tried to run. Ridge did neither. He simply stood there, facing the building, watching through the windows as the emergency lights began to strobe. Sirens approached in the distance, growing louder with each second. Ridge's expression remained neutral, but his hands curled into fists at his sides, then relaxed. His breathing was steady. His gaze never wavered from the entrance. Lanker shifted his weight. "You planning on causing more trouble?" Ridge did not answer. He did not look at the MP. His attention was fixed entirely on the trauma bay visible through the glass, where nurses were now moving with increased urgency, where Breslin was directing traffic with sharp gestures, where equipment was being activated, and monitors were lighting up in preparation. The sirens were close now, close enough to feel in the chest, close enough to drown out everything else. Ridge remained perfectly still, watching, waiting, knowing what was about to happen and powerless to stop it. The ambulance lights appeared through the fog like red and blue ghosts, growing more solid as they approached. Ridge's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Behind him, Dubose radioed their position to dispatch. Beside him, Lanker maintained his grip. In front of him, through layers of glass and institutional indifference, a man was about to die using protocols that would fail him. And Ridge Calloway, who had been thrown out, who had been dismissed, who had been judged by his appearance instead of his knowledge, could only stand there and watch it unfold exactly as he knew it would. If you've ever felt invisible when you had something important to say, drop a comment below. And if you want to see how this moment changes everything, stay with us. The ambulance doors burst open and paramedics flooded out like water breaking through a dam. The gurney hit the pavement hard, wheels rattling as they rushed Admiral Griffin Lowe toward the entrance. His face was swollen beyond. Recognition, lips purple, throat distended in a way that made even experienced trauma staff flinch. Commander Parthena Ulrich ran alongside the gurney, one hand gripping the rail, the other holding a tablet displaying his medical file. He collapsed during a briefing 20 minutes ago. Epinephrine administered in the field, no response. Airway is compromising fast. The automatic doors opened for them. Protocol recognized what it needed to. Breslin stepped back as the convoy swept past her into Trauma Bay 1. Dr. Marzen Falk was already scrubbed and gloved, his team positioned around the room like chess pieces waiting for the game to begin. He took one look at the Admiral's throat, and his expression shifted from readiness to concern. "Let's get him intubated. Prep the crick kid as backup." Outside in the parking lot, Ridge heard the words through the open doors before they swung shut again. His body tensed. Lanker felt it and tightened his grip on Ridge's shoulder. Easy now. Ridge said nothing. His eyes tracked every movement visible through the windows. The way the nurses surrounded the gurney, the way Dr. Falk positioned himself at the head, the way Breslin hovered near the entrance to the trauma bay, watching through the glass partition like an audience member who could not look away. Inside Trauma 1, the monitor came alive with numbers that told a story nobody wanted to hear. Oxygen saturation at 92%, heart rate climbing, blood pressure unstable. Falk moved with practiced efficiency, tilting the Admiral's head back, inserting the laryngoscope blade. The light illuminated a throat so swollen it looked like raw meat. He adjusted the angle, searching for anatomical landmarks that should have been obvious. Airways occluded, switching to video, laryngoscope. A nurse handed him the device without being asked. Falk inserted the camera-equipped scope, and the team watched the monitor as it transmitted images from inside the Admiral's throat. There was nothing. No vocal cords, no opening, just tissue pressed against tissue in a mass that blocked everything. The oxygen saturation dropped, 90%, 88, 85. Nurse Gilroy, a 15-year veteran with steady hands and steadier nerves, glanced at the monitor and then at Falk. Her voice stayed calm, but the words carried weight. "SOTs are falling. We're losing him." Falk pulled the scope out and stepped back half a pace, reassessing. His mind ran through protocols, alternatives, contingencies. Every option required an airway. Every airway was blocked. Crick tray. Now, the cricothyrotomy kit appeared on the instrument table. Sterile blade, tracheal hook, bougie dilator. It was a brutal procedure, reserved for situations where nothing else worked. You cut through the front of the neck, found the cricothyroid membrane between the thyroid and cricoid cartilages, made an incision, and inserted a tube directly into the trachea. It bypassed everything above it. It was supposed to be foolproof. Falk palpated the Admiral's neck, fingers pressing through swollen tissue, searching for the familiar ridge of cartilage. His fingers moved in small circles, probing, searching, his brow furrowed. He probed again, deeper this time, then pulled his hands back and looked at them as if they had betrayed him. Landmarks are obliterated. The swelling's too diffuse. I can't isolate the membrane. The words landed like stones in water. Ripples of panic spread through the room in glances, in shifted stances, in the way people's breathing synchronized with the accelerating monitor alarms. 80%, 78, 74. Commander Parthena stepped closer to the glass partition. "What's happening?" Falk did not turn to look at her. "We're doing everything we can." Dr. Kemper, a younger physician with less field experience but sharp instincts, moved to the other side of the gurney. "What about a surgical airway? Full tracheostomy?" Falk shook his head, still staring at the Admiral's neck as if willing the anatomy to reveal itself. "There's no time. And with this swelling, we'd be cutting blind. We could sever the carotid, perforate the esophagus. We'd kill him faster. 70%. 68. Outside, Ridge watched the organized choreography inside Trauma 1 dissolve into something more chaotic. He saw Falk step back. He saw Kemper lean in. He saw nurses exchanging looks that medical professionals only exchange when options are running out. The monitor's alarm was audible even through the glass, a high-pitched shriek that measured a life in declining numbers. Ridge pulled against Lanker's grip, not violently, not suddenly. Just a steady, increasing pressure that said he was done waiting. "Let me go." Lanker's hand tightened. "Sir, you need to stay right here." Ridge turned his head slightly, just enough to make eye contact. "That man is going to die in the next 90 seconds if I don't get in there." Dubose moved closer, hand dropping to his belt where the restraints hung. "You're not going anywhere." Ridge did not argue. There was no time for argument. He shifted his weight, dropped his center of gravity, and twisted in a movement so precise and economical that Lanker's grip broke before he realized what was happening. Ridge was already moving, sprinting toward the entrance with the kind of speed that came from muscle memory older than conscious thought. Dubose lunged but caught only air. His radio was in his hand before Ridge reached the doors. Code Silver. Unauthorized individual breaching ER. The doors opened for Ridge the way they had refused to earlier. He was through them and into the corridor before security could mobilize. Breslin heard the commotion, heard DuBose's shouted warning, and turned just in time to see Ridge coming straight toward her. "Stop him!" But Ridge was not stopping. He moved past her with the kind of lateral acceleration that made people step aside on instinct. Two orderlies tried to intercept him and found themselves off balance, not hurt, but thoroughly bypassed. Ridge's trajectory was singular. Trauma Bay 1. Nothing else existed. He crashed through the door. The medical team looked up in collective shock. A homeless man, disheveled and desperate, had just invaded their sterile field during a critical emergency. Falk's mouth opened to shout, to order him removed, to demand security. Then Ridge looked at the monitor, 68% and falling. His eyes moved to the Admiral's neck, taking in the swelling pattern, the discoloration, the way the tissue bulged asymmetrically. His expression shifted from urgency to recognition in less than a second. Retropharyngeal abscess with Ludwig's angina progression. The infection's tracking posterior. You're never going to get a crick through the anterior approach. The room went silent. Even the alarms seemed to fade into background static. Falk stared at Ridge, his gloved hand still hovering over the Admiral's throat, frozen in the act of attempting the impossible. "How do you know that?" Ridge did not answer the question. There was no time for explanations. "I need a 14-gauge angiocath, a 3 ml syringe, and a bag valve mask. Now." Falk hesitated. Every instinct, every protocol, every regulation said to remove this man immediately. But something in Ridge's voice, something in the precision of his diagnosis, something in the way he moved with absolute certainty toward the gurney overrode hesitation. Nurse Gilroy did not wait for Falk's approval. She grabbed the angiocath from the supply cart, grabbed the syringe, grabbed the bag valve mask. She placed them in Ridge's hands. Ridge positioned himself at the Admiral's right side. His fingers palpated the neck with movements that were surgical in their precision. He was not searching, he was confirming. His thumb found a landmark invisible to everyone else, a point where anatomy remained intact beneath the chaos of infection. He took the angiocath and inserted it at an angle that made Falk inhale sharply. It was not anterior. It was not the standard approach. Ridge was going lateral through the cricothyroid space from the side, accessing the airway through a trajectory that bypassed the swelling entirely. The needle penetrated. Air hissed through the catheter, a sound so quiet and so definitive that everyone in the room heard it over the alarms. Ridge removed the needle, leaving the catheter in place. He attached the syringe barrel as an adapter, connected the bag valve mask, and began ventilating with smooth, measured compressions. The monitor responded, 72%, 76, 81, 85. The alarm stopped shrieking, the room filled with the sound of breathing, mechanical and steady and impossibly present. The Admiral's color began to return, purple fading to pale pink, lips losing their cyanotic tint. Falk stared at Ridge, at the improvised airway, at the numbers climbing on the monitor, at the man who should not have been able to do what he just did. "Where did you learn that?" Ridge stepped back from the gurney. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline draining away and leaving exhaustion in its wake. He did not answer Falk. He did not look at anyone. He just stood there, breathing hard, staring at the monitor as if he needed confirmation that the numbers were real. Breslin appeared in the doorway, flanked by Lanker and DuBose. Her face was pale, her voice sharp. "Arrest him." Commander Parthena raised one hand. The gesture was small but carried absolute authority. Wait. She had been standing in the back of the room, watching everything. Now she moved forward, her eyes locked on Ridge with an intensity that made him finally look up and meet her gaze. That technique. "What's it called?" Ridge's jaw worked. He looked like he was deciding whether to answer. Then quietly, almost reluctantly, he spoke. "Lateral transtracheal jet access." Parthena went completely still. Her face drained of what little color remained. She took one involuntary step backward as if the words had physical force. "That's a Tier 1 combat protocol. JSOC medics only, special operations." She moved closer, studying Ridge's face with new recognition forming behind her eyes. "Who are you?" Before Ridge could answer, before anyone could move, the Admiral stirred on the gurney. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, and struggling. Then they sharpened, fixed, found Ridge standing there beside him. Admiral Griffinlow's lips moved. His voice was barely audible, hoarse and damaged, but the word came through clear enough to stop every heart in the room. Reaper? If this story reminds you of someone who knew more than anyone believed, share this video. And if you want to see what happens when the truth finally comes out, subscribe and stay until the end. The single word hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Reaper. Commander Parthena's face went from pale to bloodless. Her hand moved to her mouth, then dropped as if she had forgotten what it was doing there. She took another step back, her eyes never leaving Ridge's face. That's impossible. Breslin looked between them, her confusion shifting to alarm. What's impossible? Who is he? Admiral Lowe's hand trembled as he reached toward Ridge. It was not a gesture of gratitude. It was something deeper, more primal, the movement of someone confirming that a ghost was solid, that the impossible was real. His fingers brushed Ridge's sleeve and stopped there. Ridge Calloway, call sign Reaper. SEAL Team 3, Combat Medical Specialist. The Admiral's voice was stronger now, gaining force with each word. He turned his head slightly to look at Parthena, his aide, the woman who managed his schedule and maintained his files and knew the names of every person who had ever served under his command. Pulled from my file. Listed as, what was it? Parthena's voice came out barely above a whisper. Missing in action. Presumed killed in action. Operation Ember Glass. October 2019. The transformation. In the room was immediate and total. Dr. Falk's expression shifted from defensive confusion to something approaching awe. Nurse Gilroy's hand went to her mouth. Even the younger physicians and nurses who had been focused on monitoring equipment now turned to stare at the man in the torn jacket standing beside the gurney. The MPs at the door lowered their hands from their belts. Security personnel who had been moving to intercept stopped mid-stride. Breslin stood frozen in the doorway. Her clipboard hung forgotten at her side. The reality of what she had done, of who she had ordered removed, was settling over her like weight she could not shake off. Ridge said nothing. He just stood there, his breathing still uneven from exertion, his hands loose at his sides, his expression unreadable. He looked like a man who had heard his own eulogy and had no words left to contest it. Admiral Lowe tried to sit up. Falk moved immediately to stop him, but the Admiral waved him off with surprising strength for someone who had been dying minutes earlier. He was supposed to be. We lost contact after an exfil went sideways in Helmand Province. No remains recovered, no signal, no confirmation. The Admiral's eyes stayed locked on Ridge, searching his face for answers that Ridge was not offering. We waited 6 months, then we moved on. The words landed with brutal simplicity. Ridge's jaw tightened, but he still did not speak. The Admiral reached out again, this time gripping Ridge's wrist with a strength that made the medical staff exchange worried glances. "Where have you been, son?" Ridge looked down at the hand on his wrist. When he looked back up, his eyes were distant, focused on something beyond the room, beyond the moment, here, there, nowhere that mattered. The Admiral's grip tightened. It mattered. You mattered. Ridge said nothing to that. What could he say? That the system had failed him? That 17 attempts to re-establish contact had been flagged and buried? That by the time his injuries healed and he was ready to return, his records had been archived and his existence erased? The silence said everything his words could not. Admiral Lowe released Ridge's wrist and slowly, with great effort, raised his right hand. His arm trembled from weakness, but the motion was unmistakable. It formed into a salute, crisp and formal, despite the hospital gown and the catheter still protruding from his neck. "You saved my life, Chief." Again. The word again carried weight that only the two of them fully understood. It implied history, implied bonds forged in circumstances that could not be explained in a trauma bay. Ridge looked at the salute. His own hand remained at his side. "I'm not active duty, sir. Haven't been for a long time." The Admiral's hand did not waver. "You'll always be one of mine." Dr. Falk stepped forward, his earlier skepticism completely gone. He looked at Ridge with the expression of someone reassessing everything he thought he knew. "I need to understand. That technique. I've been practicing emergency medicine for 15 years. I've never seen anything like what you just did." Ridge turned to face him. "The lateral approach bypasses anterior obstruction. It's not in civilian protocols. Too high risk without combat field training. You just performed it in a sterile ER. Ridge's expression did not change. I've done it in a lot worse. The statement hung there, simple and devastating. Falk nodded slowly, understanding blooming across his features. He extended his hand. Ridge looked at it for a moment, then shook it. The gesture felt like an absolution neither of them had known was needed. Commander Parthena had been silent, processing, recalibrating. Now she turned to Breslin with an expression that could have frozen nitrogen. Her voice, when it came, was measured, controlled, and absolutely lethal in its precision. "Lieutenant Tate, you ordered this man removed from the facility?" Breslin's voice was small, almost childlike. "I did, ma'am. I didn't know who he was." Parthena took one step closer. "You didn't ask. You saw someone who didn't fit your expectations and you assumed they were a threat. Ma'am, I was following protocol for securing the area before the Admiral's arrival. Protocol does not excuse judgment, Lieutenant." Admiral Lowe's voice cut through from the gurney, still hoarse but carrying unmistakable authority. "You nearly cost me my life because you couldn't see past appearances. Because someone didn't look the way you expected a hero to look." Breslin opened her mouth, closed it again. There was nothing to say. No defense that would not sound like excuse. No explanation that would undo what had happened. The Admiral looked at Parthena. "I want a full review of her conduct, and I want Chief Calloway's service record pulled immediately. Complete audit of his discharge status and why no one followed up when he went dark." Parthena nodded. "Consider it done, sir." Breslin's clipboard slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. The sound echoed in the silent room. She bent to retrieve it, her hands shaking, but Lanker was already there, picking it up and handing it back to her with an expression that mixed pity with disappointment. She took it and walked out of the trauma bay without another word. The door closed behind her with a soft pneumatic hiss. Ridge watched her go. There was no satisfaction in his expression, no vindication, just a bone-deep weariness that seemed older than his years. 2 weeks later, the ceremony room at Naval Medical Center San Diego held fewer than a dozen people. There was no press, no photographers, no formal proceedings beyond what was absolutely necessary. Admiral Lowe stood at the front, fully recovered, his uniform crisp and his bearing restored. Commander Parthena stood beside him, holding a folded flag and a set of medical insignia that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Ridge stood across from them, wearing borrowed khakis that did not quite fit. He was clean-shaven now, hair trimmed, but the structure of military bearing sat uncomfortably on him like a coat he had forgotten how to wear. Dr. Falk and Nurse Gilroy stood in the back, witnesses to something they felt privileged to observe. Admiral Lowe opened a folder and began to read. Chief Ridge Calloway was declared missing in action on October 14th, 2019. His status remained unchanged for 6 years, not because he was lost, but because we stopped looking. The Admiral's voice was steady, but carried an undercurrent of something that might have been shame or might have been anger at a system that had failed one of its own. After his exfil was compromised, Chief Calloway sustained injuries that required months of recovery. He attempted to re-establish contact with command 17 times. Every request was flagged as a potential security violation and buried in bureaucratic process. Ridge's hands tightened at his sides. It was the only visible reaction to hearing his own erasure recited as documented fact. By the time he was medically cleared, his records had been archived. No follow-up, no outreach. He fell through every crack we built into the system that was supposed to protect him. Admiral Lowe closed the folder. Parthena stepped forward with the flag and insignia. The fabric was crisp, the colors vivid, the weight of it symbolic in ways that transcended ceremony. Effective immediately, Chief Calloway's status is restored to honorable active reserve. Full VA benefits, back pay, and medical coverage are reinstated. The Admiral paused, meeting Ridge's eyes directly. "And I'm personally ensuring he has a position here as a civilian trauma consultant if he wants it." Ridge looked at the insignia in Parthena's outstretched hands. His throat worked. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I don't know if I can do this again, sir." Admiral Lowe's expression softened. "You already did. You never stopped being who you were trained to be. You just stopped being seen." Ridge reached out and took the insignia. His fingers closed around the metal pins. Then, slowly, deliberately, He brought his right hand up in a salute that was as sharp as the day he had first learned to render one. Admiral Lowe returned it immediately. The motion was mirror perfect, two men separated by rank and circumstance, but connected by something that went deeper than either. 1 week after that, Ridge stood outside the emergency wing entrance at 5:30 a.m. as the sun began to burn off the morning fog. He held a hospital ID badge in his hand. The laminated card read, "Trauma Consultant, Ridge Calloway, USN Retired." The photo showed a face that was still getting used to being recognized. The automatic doors sensed his approach and opened smoothly. No hesitation, no malfunction, just clean mechanical response to his presence. Nurse Gilroy came out carrying a coffee in each hand. She saw him and smiled, the kind of smile that was warm without being intrusive. First day, Ridge looked at the doors, at the badge, at the threshold he had been thrown out of and was now being welcomed across. Something like that. "You coming in?" He looked at the building that had saved him by letting him save someone else. He thought about all the emergency rooms and field hospitals and improvised aid stations where he had held the line between life and death. He thought about the years spent invisible, forgotten, erased. And he thought about the fact that some part of him had never stopped being a medic, even when the world stopped seeing him as one. The doors stood open, waiting. Ridge stepped through. Inside, the morning shift was beginning. Nurses checked charts, orderlies restocked supplies. Someone laughed at something over coffee. The rhythm of a hospital coming to life. Ridge walked past the desk, where Breslin had once stood. A different officer was there now, someone he did not recognize. They nodded at him. He nodded back. Dr. Falk appeared from one of the bays, saw Ridge, and raised a hand in greeting. "You ready to teach us that lateral approach?" Ridge almost smiled. It was a small thing, barely visible. But it was there. "Yeah, I'm ready." The morning light filtered through the windows, cutting through the fog in golden shafts that painted the floor in patterns that shifted as the sun rose. Ridge walked into that light, into the hospital, into the work that had never really left him, even when everything else had. Some people never stop being who they are, even when the world forgets to look. If you know someone who kept going when no one was watching, share their story in the comments. And if you believe that everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are, subscribe. Because stories like this remind us that heroes don't always look the way we expect them to. Sometimes they look like the people we walk past every day without seeing at all.